Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to wherever you might be on planet Earth. And welcome to the June 28th episode of Let's Get Sassy. This is your one-stop shop for everything sassy from your friends at Cisco. I'm John, and I will be your sassy MC for this episode. Today's episode is going to be amazing. Sassy as it relates to the public sector. This is a vitally important and sometimes overlooked application of SASE in the world of security and networking. We're going to discuss some of the most crucial risk management frameworks and their implications on your public sector SASE business. So buckle up. But first, the news. So welcome back to our news segment. We're glad you made it. And if you've been here before, welcome back. In this week's acquisition news, Cisco has announced the intent to acquire Exedian. Exedian is an industry-leading network performance monitoring partner that enables seamless operation of service provider, transport, and 5G networks. This acquisition will work to complement Cisco's already strong capabilities in this area. As you may know, Cisco Live wrapped up a couple of weeks ago. One of the big highlights was Cisco Secure Access. And as you can see in this video, it's going to be a great comprehensive end-to-end SSE product from Cisco. Also this year at Cisco Live, Cisco has announced it is re-upping its partnership with the National Football League. The NFL's Chief Security Officer, Kathy Lanier, highlighted how Cisco and the NFL partnered to secure the Super Bowl for the last couple of years. So a real feather in the cap to Cisco Secure. In today's Talos segment, I would like to highlight Patch Tuesday. So in addition to highlighting regular Microsoft key vulnerabilities, we have other new day zero reports and disclosed vulnerabilities that Talos works exhaustively, on a regular basis to bring you up to speed with. I'll also remind you about the Beers with Talos podcast, which is a great little informal podcast that talks about all kinds of subjects from security to things that have nothing to do with it. So should be a lot of fun. And this would be a good time for me to remind you, if you haven't already, to like and subscribe to the video. And you'll be assured that way that you'll never miss another episode of Let's Get Sassy. So thanks for doing that. So let's dig into this week's topic. SASE for the public sector and the Fed. To introduce this week's topic, I want to welcome back our host with the most, Sarah Bloom. Take it away, Sarah.
Welcome back to Let's Get Sassy. I'm your host, Sarah Bloom. We have a special episode today where we're going to explore how Secure Access Services Edge and its subcomponents can help the U.S. federal government comply with various cybersecurity frameworks and initiatives. We're excited to welcome Alvin Richburg back to the podcast as our expert. Now, Alvin, we met you in episode 1, but can you give us some of your background with this topic?
Yeah, Sarah. Thanks for having me back. As you said, I'm Alvin Richburg, and I guess I can just start with my background. I've been working in this space for about 15 years. I was in the Marine Corps. Went through the Cisco Networking Academy, and started doing that for about 6.5 years in the Marines, and then moved into working with University of Texas in their security operations group. So that's when we took the policies that the CISO would send down from either the Texas state government and then implemented at the University of Texas system schools, which there are about 18 of them. And then I got a little tired of that work. It was a bit grindy, I would say, and I moved over to working in Washington, D.C. With a lot of the federal governments in both classified and sensitive environments. We basically would take the directives from either the agency heads or directors and even up to the president or the White House, and when they would send down new changes, we'd try to implement those policies as we saw fit. Now there are a few new initiatives that have come out since I've joined Cisco, and since I'm on the SASE team, I guess I'm here to tell you guys how we can implement them with our SASE portfolio.
Great. So let's start with listing out a few of the challenges that we see that are facing the Fed.
All right, so ultimately there's a whole lot. I could probably just do a whole episode listing them out specifically one by one, but to be frank, the Fed, their main challenges are very similar to traditional IT organizations. So Any type of threat that you would generally see, like ransomware or phishing or lots of insider threat, is a strong possibility there, as you've seen over the years. But some of the things that are a little bit different than the traditional IT organization are the sensitivity level of the data. Obviously, every organization has their own IP that they want to protect and secrets that they want to protect, but the secrets that the American government has to protect, once those are compromised, you can start to see entire systems collapse inside of our country. The economy could collapse. Those are all things that we have to be pretty concerned about when not only designing products to be implemented in the Fed, but designing the networks in ways in which they're implemented as well. And then finally, the way that the Fed develops their standards, they have to be in a way that makes it modular enough for not only them to hold themselves accountable to it, but the industries that rely on them, the state governments often adopt those standards, and then you see it all around the world. So those are just a few of the challenges that I see with the Fed.
Right, yeah, and you mentioned some of those standards. So can we talk about some of the frameworks and initiatives that address those
Yeah,
challenges?
yeah. We have. I'm gonna just talk about a few of the more recent ones. There's some that go really far back, like the National Privacy Act. That one's a part of a part of it, but we're not gonna go into that one. To I guess to kick it off, the one that's most relevant to a SASE conversation is TIC 3.0, and that's Trusted Internet Connections. What that basically calls for are ensuring traffic that's headed to an application is protected, which will sound familiar when you're talking about SASE. The next one is a 2021 standard that came out from, I believe, the FTC. That's the IPv6 mandate. So that basically says that all all agencies will be IPv6 enabled by 2025. The next one is a zero trust framework. And we have two of those. We have one from DISA, which is the defense side, and one from CISA, which is the civilian side of the American government. Because we're, largely the larger portion of the government is the civilian side, we're going to focus on the CISA model. And it's a little bit easier to palate when you're coming into this fresh. The next one is the risk management framework. That one's almost exactly as it sounds. So I'm not going to go into explaining that one too much. And then finally, we have CDM, or continuous diagnostics and mitigation. As you'll see throughout this conversation, a lot of these inform one another. So that can help us not only truncate the conversation, but it can also help you understand, like, why do we have so many standards, and how do I measure where I devote my time? But if you do it all the correct way and plan it out, eventually you're able to cover a lot of these by really focusing on the ones that are the most important.
So let's start with TIC since you mentioned that first. So what is TIC?
So, as I mentioned earlier, TIC 3.0 is trusted internet connections. It's an effort by the federal government to optimize and secure internet-bound connections, or connections toward applications in more in reality. It's one of the more modern or unique frameworks, actually, because it's got a non-prescriptive way of telling the agency heads how to implement the solutions based on what their agency actually needs. It provides the agency heads quite a bit of flexibility to secure their application access. I like it.
Yeah, so then how can SASE assist with complying with TIC 3.0?
I guess we didn't define SASE in this episode, but as as it goes, SASE is combining network and security capabilities into a cloud native service so that you can simplify how you protect users' access to applications, which sounds familiar, right? TIC 3.0, it's almost perfectly aligned. But traditionally, TIC required traffic to flow through expensive, very resource intensive on premise appliances like firewalls, load balancers, and things like that. However, with SASE, agencies can leverage cloud-based services, which lowers the overhead on how much they have to build into their own data centers, or if they even need data centers. Some agencies have been mandated to move away from having physical data centers. SASE integrates, well, at least the SSE component of SASE integrates secure web gateways and cloud access security brokers or CASB, to enforce policies and threats, ensuring which helps us ensure tick compliance. It makes it really simple. A lot of the tick-based SASE conversations focus on implementing IDS and IPS, adding DLP, and also verifying the compliant devices are encrypted, which most SSE or SASE portfolios have. If you were looking at a Cisco solution, what you'd be looking at is Duo Beyond and Cisco Umbrella SIG, which would meet the majority of the needs for a TIC 3.0 project in the federal government.
Right, and now we've covered a lot of the security SSE topics, but let's talk maybe more and switch to the network slash SD-WAN portion of SASE.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, I just defined SASE with SD-WAN and didn't even talk about it. But so to be frank, most TIC conversations are not very relevant to SD-WAN. The buying center is just not there. This is a very security focused conversation. However, most SD-WAN projects are driven by zero trust implementations, which are very, very adjacent to both the IPv6 mandate that I mentioned earlier and TIC projects. So I'll just kind of combine all three in this section just to let make it a little bit more clear of how SASE plays into the role of all of this. So it's going to be a little long-winded, sorry, but here we go. Basically, if you work inside of a sensitive environment and you're trying to adopt and complete the IPv6 mandate, you'll often end up consuming services that need to support it. A lot of the data center bound solutions that we were once using didn't support IPv6, or it wasn't enabled. So a key use case for turning on IPv6 happens to be SSE, which, as I've already said, it's very closely related to TIC. So solutions like Umbrella SIG, which is a Cisco solution, can support connections from SD-WAN routers, utilizing IPv6 to build the tunnels that secure traffic coming from branches or campuses or headquarters to the policy enforcement point. I know that's a new word for this conversation. Policy enforcement point is nomenclature straight from the TIC framework. It basically is like saying traffic from anywhere must hit a policy enforcement point before it reaches that application, or a few policy enforcement points, depending on how sensitive that traffic is. And in our case, that is generally our Umbrella SIG. You can also see how SD-WAN, IPv6, and TIC work well in tandem, because some of the benefits of TIC are not only securing the traffic, but verifying it continually, which happens to be a zero trust specific thing. It also plays a little bit in the CDM, but as I said, a lot of these frameworks work really well in informing each other and making sure that that you can build projects that work well for it. But also, like I was saying, you have to secure the endpoint and verify it. That means that every single endpoint has to be manipulated if you're trying to do a TIC or enable IPv6 on them. So doing these projects together works really well together, and SD-WAN helps enable you to get these projects off the ground. It can really those projects can be really grueling and long. So it can save you a lot of manpower by trying to work them together versus setting them up as, I'm doing IPv6 this time, I'm doing TIC this time, I'm doing zero trust this time. If you build a framework and plan it out over time for the right project, you'll have good results.
Go. So IPv6 can support 340 undecillion IP addresses, and that's an insane amount of IP addresses. We're talking 3.4 times 10 to the 38th IP addresses. How can we as a security admins keep that many potential devices and networks secure?
All right, so let me break that apart. With the number of IP addresses, clients, and device types these modern networks will have to manage, I'm thinking there are a few ways we can address security and visibility. But it starts with a very vanilla answer, to be honest, and that is setting a clear security policy and segmentation. Kicking off with a clear security policy, once you have that, you're able to decide how to go forward with the next part, which is segmentation. Development of a well-segmented network allows for risk to be easily measured, just because you'll have a lot more visibility and predictability about what's supposed to happen in your network. So we generally have two types of segmentation in networks enabled with Cisco SD-WAN: macro segmentation and micro segmentation. Macro segmentation is what an organization would have built, I don't know, probably before I was even in networking, but it would have been like flat network with a bunch of VLANs. And then that would set the ability to clearly delineate like either sections like HR or engineering or something like that, or do it by device. So say user network or printer network and like IoT network, and then you'd be able to sit on your security device and see, oh well, this person's accessing this because we allowed it, and you would basically have to allow either at an IP individual IP network basis, which I don't think that would really work well or scale well, which it hasn't. Or you could do it by letting the whole VLAN access a specific service to this other VLAN, which isn't necessarily the safest. However, as time has progressed, things have gotten a lot more demanding. What we need is it's changed rapidly. So we introduce microsegmentation, and microsegmentation, commonly referred to as security tagging or SGTs, security group tagging, that basically gives you the ability to layer on top of traditional macro segmentation and tag that traffic in line to allow and disallow flows at a more granular level. I'm not going to go into too deep detail because that's not really relevant to this conversation. So I'm going to take it back a little high level with a real world example. Say we have one person, but two people. That doesn't make any sense. Anyway, say we have Bob. He was working inside of HR, and he needs to do an investigation on an engineer. Let's say her name is Sheila. So he'll need to access her computer. In a traditionally macro segmented environment, you would have those two sitting on a user VLAN. So Bob would just open up whatever client he needs to do his investigation, reach out to her computer, and access it. However, outside of an investigation, he would still always have access to her computer because he's a user and she is a user. That shouldn't work that way. And microsegmentation layers on top of that user segment to say, hey, they're users, but they have different levels of access or what they should be accessing. Bob's in HR. That's his tag. Sheila is in engineering, and that's her tag. You can now block traffic from HR to engineering. So now Bob has to ask permission to access Sheila's computer instead of him just always having access because he happens to be the same style of user or same style of device, like client device. What's really cool about macro segmentation, we're able to extend those tags across our Cisco SD-WAN deployments. So that means that if Bob were to get up and go to the St. Louis office, he would not be able to access those users' devices either. So you can basically set one policy to span your entire WAN, and that's a really cool implementation. And it lends to zero trust implementations, which we'll probably talk about in a minute.
So what about the users that are not on-prem? A lot of my customers are asking me about zero trust and they still find it confusing to define. So can you define zero trust as it applies to the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA as it's more commonly known, their model of zero trust and how these concepts we discover around network and security fit into it?
Yeah, I can do that. I guess before I jump into CISA's model, I can explain there are two zero trust models in the federal government. One is from DISA, which covers like the military and intelligence agencies, and then CISA, which is the one you specifically asked about. It covers mostly the civilian agencies and key infrastructure. Think like power grids and things like dams and things like that. So that's what CISA governs. I have a bit more experience with the CISA model, and I prefer the way it looks in presentation. So I'm going to start with that. As you can see on this graphic here, It's separated into pillars, and it's shaped like pillars on the graphic, so you're able to understand it when you hear the word pillar when in description. The system model for zero trust, it's a pretty comprehensive framework that's all encompassing, and it really emphasizes continuous verifications and strict access controls. As you can see in the graphic, the pillars are as follows: identity, device, network and environment, application workload, and data. With visibility and analytics and orchestration at the bottom, and finally governance holding it all together. So to start with identity pillar, that one focuses on identifying users and devices before granting them resources. And as I mentioned earlier, you must continuously verify them after the initial authentication.
Yeah, so can you give me a real world example to help me wrap my brain around zero trust?
Yeah, so an example that I think is pretty great and pretty relevant because we're talking about the federal government, is like access to a military base. So when I have to try to access a military base, I have to have something with me specifically, and that is a military ID card. It's not only a representation of who I am, given some from something that they gave me, but I'm also present, so they can verify my identity by looking at that card. Following that ID tells them that I'm supposed to be there just by the nature of what it is itself. So that's the who I am and what I have. Alternatively, and this is something that's newer to the zero trust model, would be if I had something that I wasn't supposed to have, that would manipulate my good standing that I once established with my who I am and what I have. So that just gives like an easy idea of like how zero trust authentication works with when referring to the identity.
Yeah, that makes sense. Some of my customers are saying to me, Sarah, we have, multi-factor authentication, we have that identity piece, so therefore we have zero trust. But they don't consider the other aspects of zero trust. So can you walk me through the rest of the model?
Yeah, yeah, I actually hear that quite a bit too. So I'll just move into the next pillar, which is device. The device pillar, this one ensures, for the most part, that endpoints are compliant with security policies, and also that they're not infected with malware. I guess I should have probably led with that one, which since it's the most important. But SASE aligns with this pretty well, actually, just because it provides a framework for secure access to resources based on device posture. So at this point in the zero trust model, where we're authenticating and verifying identity, we're validating devices, and now we're starting to dynamically apply policies based on who you are, what you have, and what you're trying to connect with. SASE really empowers this, and it helps zero trust really. It helps empower zero trust projects. All right, so moving on to network. This pillar focuses on two key ideas: the network you can control and the one you don't. For the network you can control, implementing things like network segmentation, micro-segmentation, and network access control, they limit the risk surface of a security incident. So that's why it's included inside of the zero trust framework. Since I went into that in an earlier segment, I'm not going to go into any further detail on that. As for the network you don't own, it's important that we layer on SSE functionalities en route to cloud applications because we don't actually own those networks in between. So we want to see things like your secure web gateways, your CASBs, your IPS, IDS, and digital experience monitoring because with that loss of visibility, you want to try to get not only as much visibility as you can back, but you also want to be able to layer in security controls so that you can manipulate how that access is being taken advantage of. Uh, so jumping on to the next pillar, application workloads. So this pillar focuses on implementing security and least privileged access controls at the application, so as close to the application as possible. With this one, you'll see protections placed both in clouds and at data centers that people have to traverse. I use the term in the tick section called policy enforcement point. We would want to place a policy enforcement point right at the application if possible. We basically want to verify that the user and device has access to the individual application, what type of application that they have, based on their context, and what role you want to place on them. SASE helps with this because the SSE portion maintains those controls in most scenarios and with most vendors, so that that helps you out a lot. So that not only helps you out a lot, but it makes sure that you're having the right level of access. The final pillar is data. So I've mentioned SSE a lot, and this one's pretty important. So this one focuses on both data in rest and in motion. SSEs come with CASBs and DLP functionality built in most cases. So that gives you the ability to provide both data in motion protections, which is generally your inline DLP, and then CASB stuff does the data at rest.
So what I'm hearing, Alvin, is that least privilege access is really huge with zero trust. Essentially, one user accessing one application either over a network you control or a network that you don't, right?
Yeah, that's exactly it. We layer in least privilege into almost all of the pillars, actually, and they kind of inform each other, starting at that identity pillar. But I guess to wrap up the 5 pillars, since I'm complete all of them, as I mentioned earlier, there are 2 zero trust frameworks, one for civilian and one for the military networks. And some of them haven't completed their transitions already, but that is something that drives the majority of the conversations that we're having within the federal government. I'll conclude this by saying that the zero trust maturity model is actually a living document, which, as I mentioned with TIC, that's a pretty modern evolution for the federal government, and it's pretty exciting because what that means is if agency leadership sees something that interests them or they think it's a really cool solution to protect their networks and ensure that it's a stronger level of zero trust, they can use that information and send it back to either DISA or CISA and help inform the rest of the agencies to get on board as well. So our government is continually modernizing with these zero trust maturity models.
All right, so we've covered TIC, IPv6, and zero trust. Let's move on now to risk management framework, or RMF. So how can SASE assist federal agencies in implementing and maintaining RMF compliance?
All right, so RMF's like the pretty old one. So I think that one came out in like 2010. So it's basically a representation of a process for managing risk and ensuring the security of information systems, if I remember that definition correctly. So SASE can help align with the features and capabilities that RMF calls out pretty closely because SASE provides centralized visibility and control over network traffic. It also allows agency to monitor and enforce security policies. And what's more important, because those are like some things that you would have heard from SSE, but this one also encompasses SD-WAN, because SD-WAN can ensure secure connectivity. It can ensure secure data transmission, and then also support a wide swath of encryption protocols, at least in the Cisco's flavor. Those 3 capabilities of SD-WAN are essential for protecting sensitive government information. And then when you combine it with SSE, you can leverage a full suite of SASE capabilities to streamline the RMF compliance efforts that the government set forth for us.
Right, and that's incredibly valuable. So lastly, let's discuss continuous diagnosis and mitigation, so CDM. So how can SASE play a role in helping federal agencies achieve effective CDM?
So I've already alluded to this one quite a bit with the continuous verification and things like that I was talking about inside of, I believe, Zero Trust, and I probably mentioned it in TIC as well. But CDM is like an ongoing process that aims to enhance cybersecurity by doing continuous monitoring, as I've said, managing and responding to threats. So SASE contributes to that in a few key ways by providing once again, real-time network visibility and being able to see those security events in live real time. They upload it all to a big old dashboard, which gives you that centralized viewpoint that I was referring to. And with the built-in analytics and threat intelligence that comes with, at least with the Cisco variant, I can't talk about everybody's, SASE can identify anomalies and potential threats. It enables agencies to perform network segmentation, microsegmentation, which helps isolate compromised systems and limit the impact of breaches. You see how this one's starting to sound like all the other ones? That's because I saved CDM for last because it's a great source of funds to be able to implement a lot of the controls and things that you would have needed to meet inside of the zero trust and then the tick and things like that. So SASE's integration with security orchestration, automation, and response tools, or SOAR, which is a very long acronym. It enhances the incident response and accelerates mitigation efforts. So overall, SASE plus CDM, man, it really knocks out a lot of what a lot of our government agencies are trying to get accomplished with all of these frameworks that we've talked about today.
We're nearing the end of the episode today, so I want to thank Alvin for providing his insightful explanations. It's clear that SASE and its subcomponents offer significant benefit to U.S. federal agencies. So, Alvin, do you have any final thoughts that you want to leave us?
Yeah, I mean, I have said a lot today, but I don't have much more to add. Seriously. SASE represents a shift in network and security architecture. Leveraging its cloud's native approach provides federal agencies with the right tools to address this ever-changing threat landscape. It's something that, as we look at all of the frameworks and initiatives that we've talked about today, we should really consider adopting SASE and the tools that inform it.
Well, that wraps up today's episode. I want to thank Alvin for taking the time today to share his knowledge working in and with the federal government. If you have any questions about anything that we covered here today, any new content that was released at Cisco Live, or just want any additional information in general, please reach out to your local Cisco account team, and they can get you the right SASE resource involved with your project. Your local team is fully equipped to guide you through your SASE transformation, and this is what we do. I'm this week's host, Sarah Bloom. Thank you again for joining us for this episode of Let's Get SASE, and we'll catch you next time.